Jai Hind children, as you know that you are having your social science unit test, isn't it? And the questions will be coming in MCQ pattern, and the first chapter, that is the Rise of Nationalism in Europe, this chapter is coming in the test till page 10. So you have to read the chapter thoroughly children. Do remember that the questions will be coming in between the chapter also, and you have to learn the new words which are given in the corner of the chapter, or in the first and second pages. You can see in the corner some new words are given children, so you have to go through it also. Okay, now let us revise the chapter, the Rise of Nationalism in Europe children. Yes, the Rise of Nationalism in Europe. You can see a famous painting which was painted by whom? By Frederick Sorio children. So a famous painting which was painted by Frederick Sorio, and to remember that he was a French artist. Okay, so Frederick Sorio, who was a French artist, in 1848 he prepared a series of 4 prints visualizing his dream of a world made up of democratic and social republics, as he called them. So you can see the picture, you can see the picture which was painted by Frederick Sorio on the screen. In 1848, Frederick Sorio, who was a French artist children, he prepared a series of 4 prints visualizing his dream of a world made up of democratic and social republic, as he called them. So how many prints were there? 4 prints. Do you remember that? So the first print of the series shows the peoples of Europe and America, men and women of all ages and social classes, marching in a long train and offering homage to the Statue of Liberty. So do you remember that? Artists of the time of the French Revolution personified liberty as a female figure. Here you can see the Statue of Liberty. You can recognize the torch of enlightenment she bears in one hand and the Charter of the Rights of Man in the other. You can see children, some new words are there in the right hand side. Absolutist, that is a government, literally a government or system of rule that has no restraints on the power exercised. In history, the term refers to a form of monarchical government that was centralized, militarized and repressive. An utopian, a vision of society that is so ideal that it is unlikely to actually exist. So you just go through the new words also, that will also come in the test. Okay, so the first print of the series shows the people of Europe and America, men and women of all ages and social classes. They are marching in a long train and they are paying homage to whom? The Statue of Liberty. Then the Statue of Liberty is symbolized as personified as liberty, Statue of Liberty as a female figure. So the torch of enlightenment she bears in one hand and the Charter of the Rights of Man in the other. Okay. Then on the earth, in the foreground of the image, lie the shattered remains of the symbols of absolutist institutions. Then Sorio's utopian vision. Utopian means a vision of society that is so ideal that is unlikely to exist. ऐसी सोसाइटी, इतनी अच्छी सोसाइटी, इतने आइडियल वैल्यूज़ हैं जो सही मायने में देखने को नहीं मिलती हैं. So in Sorio's utopian vision, the people of the world are grouped as distinct nations, identified through their flags and national costume. Then you have to name the countries which were leading the nations. You have to name the nations which are leading this procession. So leading the procession way past the Statue of Liberty are the United States and Switzerland. So do remember that. You have to name the nation who were leading this procession, United States and Switzerland children, which by this time were already nation states. Then comes France, and then Germany, and then children there were other countries also like Austria, then the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies, Lombardy, Poland, England, Ireland, Hungary and Russia. And from the heavens above, Christ, saints and angels, they were gazing upon the scene, and they have been used by the artists to symbolize fraternity. So do remember that. Christ, saints and angels, they have been used by the artists to symbolize fraternity. Fraternity means brotherhood among the nations of the world. So you can see another source A, Ernest Renan. What is a nation? So he was a French philosopher, and his vision of understanding what makes a nation is given in the source, in the column, children. You have to read that also. Okay, so in this chapter we have studied about how nationalism emerged as a force and which brought about many changes in the political and mental world of Europe. Okay, and then the end result of these changes was the emergence of the nation state in place of the multinational dynastic empires of Europe. Then the French Revolution. Now do remember that in which year French Revolution took place. That was 1789. So the first clear expression of nationalism came with the French Revolution, which took place in 1789. Yes. So France was a full-fledged territorial state in 1789 under the rule of an absolute monarch. Then the political and constitutional changes that came in the wake of the French Revolution led to the transfer of power from the monarchy to a body of French citizens. So one aim, the major objective of the French Revolution was the transfer of power from the monarchy to a body of French citizens. Do remember that, this also, children. Then the French revolutionary, they introduced various measures and practices that could create a sense of collective identity among the French people. So first was the ideas of la patrie. Now the question can come like this also. What do you mean by the word la patrie? Fatherland, the fatherland, children. And le citoyen, the citizen. So this was the first measure which was taken by the French revolutionaries to create a sense of collective identity among the French people. That is the ideas of fatherland and citizen. Then the ideas of the la patrie and le citoyen emphasize the notion of a united community which were enjoying equal rights under a constitution. Then a new French flag, that is a tricolor flag, was chosen, and it replaces the formal royal standard. So new French flag was chosen, which was a tricolor flag, children, and it replaces the former royal standard. Then what was the new name given to the States General? Yes, the new name given to the States General was National Assembly. So the States General was elected by the body of active citizens, and it was renamed the National Assembly. Then new hymns were composed and oaths were taken, all in the name of the nation. Then a centralized administrative system was put in a place, and uniform laws for all citizens within its territory were formulated. Then internal custom duties and dues were all abolished, and a uniform system of weights and measures was adopted. Then regional languages were discouraged, and in place of regional languages, French was adopted. You can say that it became the common language of the nation. So MCQ pattern, the question answers will be in MCQ pattern, children, in the test. So you have to go through the entire chapter. You have to go through the sources which are given in the book, children. So in which year French Revolution took place? 1789. So what were the measures and practices that were introduced by French revolutionaries to create a collective identity among the French people? The first is the ideas of la patrie. La patrie means the fatherland. Le citoyen means the citizen. Then second, a new French flag, that was a tricolor flag, was chosen. Then State General was elected by the body of active citizens, and it renamed the National Assembly. So what was the new name given to the States General? The National Assembly. Then new hymns were composed and oaths were all taken, all in the name of the nation. Then a centralized administrative system was put in place. Then it formulated uniform laws for all citizens within its territory. Then internal custom duties and dues were all abolished, and uniform system of weights and measures was adopted, children. Then regional dialects, regional languages were discouraged, and French became the common language of the nation. Then the revolutionaries declared that it was a mission, that it was their aim and the destiny of the French nation to liberate. Liberate means to free the people of Europe from despotism. अत्याचारी रूल से उनको मुक्त कराना है, or you can say in other words, to help people of Europe to become nations. Then, when the news of the events in France reached the different cities of Europe, students and other members of the educated middle class, they began setting up Jacobin clubs. Do remember that? So, when the news of the events in France reached the different cities of Europe, students and other members of educated middle classes, they began setting up Jacobin clubs. And their activities and campaigns, they prepared the way for the French armies. They were welcoming French armies which moved into Holland, Belgium, Switzerland, Italy in the 1790s. And with the outbreak of the revolutionary wars, the French armies began to carry the idea of nationalism abroad, children. Then Napoleon, he set about introducing many of the reforms that he had already introduced in France, children. Though through a return to monarchy, he declared himself that he is the emperor of France. He destroyed democracy in France, children, but in the administrative fields, he had incorporated revolutionary principles in order to make the whole system more rational and efficient. Okay. So the Civil Code of 1804, usually known as the Napoleonic Code. So do remember that. What is the other name? What was the other name given to the Civil Code of 1804? Yes, the other name given to the Civil Code of 1804 is the Napoleonic Code. And according to this Napoleonic Code, all the privileges which was based on birth was taken. Then he established equality before the law and he secured the right to the property. Then this Napoleonic Code was exported to the regions under French control. In the Dutch Republic and Switzerland and Italy, Germany, Napoleon simplified administrative divisions and he abolished the feudal dues and he freed peasants from serfdom and manorial dues, children. Then in the towns also guild restrictions were removed and transport and communication system were also very much improved, children. Then businessmen and small-scale producers of goods in particular began to realize that uniform laws, standardized weights and measures, and the common national currency would encourage the movement and exchange of goods and capital from one region to another. So in the area conquered, the reaction of the local populations to French rule were mixed. In the very beginning, children, in many places such as Holland and Switzerland, as well as in the cities like Brussels, Mainz, Milan and Warsaw, the French army were welcomed as harbingers of liberty. उनको इसलिए वेलकम किया जाता था कि वो लिबर्टी लेकर के आ रहे हैं, फ्रीडम लेकर के आ रहे हैं उनके लिए. But in the beginning, the French army was welcomed, but soon people turned to hostile towards the French army. The reasons were increased taxation, then second is censorship, and the third one is forced conscription, means forced recruitment into the French armies. Okay. Then the making of nationalism in Europe. You can see some important dates are also given in this page, children. So you look at the map of the mid 18th century, Europe at this time. Europe, you will find that there was no nation state. And even Germany, Italy and Switzerland were divided into different kingdoms and whose rulers had their own autonomous territories. Then Eastern and Central Europe were under autocratic monarchies within the territories of which lived diverse people. Means nothing was common. There was no concept of nation state. Even Germany, Italy and Switzerland, they were divided into kingdoms and the kings, the monarch were ruling on them. And nothing was common between the people living over there. They did not see themselves as sharing a collective identity or a common culture. They even spoke different languages and belonged to different ethnic groups. This page, this topic is also very important. You can see many types of one-word question answers can come from this page, children. The people, they spoke different languages and belonged to different ethnic groups. The Habsburg Empire that ruled over Austria and Hungary. So which empire was ruling over Austria and Hungary? That was Habsburg Empire. Or the question can come like this also. You have to name the empire which was ruling Austria-Hungary, the Habsburg Empire, children. So the Habsburg Empire that ruled over Austria and Hungary, for example, was a patchwork of many different regions and peoples. It included the Alpine regions, the Tyrol, Austria, and the Sudetenland, as well as Bohemia. Then, where the aristocracy was predominantly German speaking. So in Bohemia, aristocratic people, they used to speak German language. It also included the Italian speaking provinces of Lombardy and Venetia. Then in Hungary, half of the population spoke Magyar, while the other half spoke a variety of dialects, variety of languages, children. In Galicia, the aristocracy spoke Polish. So in Galicia, which was the language of aristocratic class, children, that was Polish. Then beside these three dominant groups, they also live within the boundaries of the empire. A mass of subject peasant peoples, Bohemians and Slovaks to the north, then Slovenes in Carinola, Croats to the south, and Romans to the east in Transylvania. Such differences did not easily promote a sense of political unity. So do remember that, children, the making of nationalism in Europe. At that time, the concept of nation, there was no concept of nation state. Even Germany, Italy, and Switzerland, they were divided into different kingdoms, and the rulers who were ruling on them, and they were autocratic monarch, and they were diverse people under their territories, and they did not see themselves as sharing a collective identity or a common culture. They spoke different languages and belonged to different ethnic groups. Even the Habsburg Empire that ruled over Austria and Hungary was example of a patchwork of many different regions and peoples. People spoke different language, means there was different language for aristocratic class, and common people spoke different languages. So there were many factors which gave rise to nationalism. We are going to discuss it. First is the aristocratic class, the aristocracy, and the new middle class, children. At that time, a landed aristocracy was the dominant class on the continent, and the members of this class were united by a common way of life that cut across regional divisions. Okay, and the aristocratic class, they spoke, do you remember that, spoke French for purposes of diplomacy and in high society, and their families were often connected by ties of marriage. And this powerful aristocracy was, however, numerically a very small group, means the population was very small. The majority of the population was made up of the peasantry, and to the west, the bulk of the land was claimed by tenants and small owners. Okay, so in western and parts of Central Europe, the growth of industrial production and trade meant the growth of towns and the emergence of commercial middle classes whose existence was based on the protection for the market. After this industrialization, when industrialization began in England in the second half of the 18th century, but in France and parts of the German states, it occurred only during the 19th century, children. But because of this industrialization, a new social group, they came into being, they came into existence. A working class population and middle classes, they were made up of industrialists, businessmen, professionals, doctors, lawyers, etc. And it was among the educated liberal middle classes that ideas of national unity, they were following the abolition of aristocratic privileges, gained popularity. They were raising that no one should be privileged by birth because he or she has taken birth in the aristocratic class. They should not be given any privileges, rather should be based on merit. Then what did liberal nationalism stand for? Liberal means freedom, children. The term liberalism derives from the Latin root liber, which meaning free. So liberalism is a word which derives from the Latin root liber, and the meaning of liber is free. And for the new middle classes, liberalism stood for the freedom for the individual and equality of all before the law. So there were two types of liberalism. One is political and other one is economic. So political liberalism means it emphasized the concept of government and by consent, and liberalism had stood for the end of autocracy and clerical privileges, and They were supporters and they wanted to adopt a constitution and representative government through parliament, and it also stressed the inviolability of private property, means right to private property. So this was political liberalism, which already we have discussed in the class, children. Then equality before the law did not necessarily stand for universal suffrage. Universal suffrage means a right to vote. France, which marked the first political experiment in liberal democracy, the right to vote and to get elected was granted exclusively to property owning men. So do remember that universal suffrage, it does not give right to each and every man and woman, children. In France, in the very beginning I'm talking about, it gave right to vote to only property owning men, children. Men without property and all women, they were excluded from political rights. Only for a brief period, and that was under the Jacobeans, did all adult males enjoy suffrage. Then the Napoleonic court went back to limited suffrage again. When Napoleon, he declared himself as the Emperor of France. Again, it was given to only those people who were wealthy. So under the Napoleonic Code, under the rule of Napoleon, children, again it went back to limited suffrage and reduced women to the status of a minor, subject to the authority of fathers and husbands. Means it was a male dominating society. Throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries, women and non-propertied men organized opposition movements demanding equal political rights. Then economic liberalism means it stood for the freedom of markets and the abolition of state-imposed restrictions on the movement of goods and capital. Means goods and capitals could move freely from one place to another without any hurdles, without any obstacles, without any restrictions. So during the 19th century, this was a strong demand of the emerging middle class. You can take the example of the German-speaking regions in the first half of the 19th century. So Napoleon's administrative measures had created out of the countless small principalities a confederation of 39 states. At that time, Germany was a confederation of 39 states, and each of these possesses its own currency and weights and measures. Means a merchant traveling in 1833 from Habsburg to Nuremberg to sell his goods would have to pass through 11 custom barriers and pay a custom duty of about 5% at each one of them. So it was so difficult to trade at that time, children. You can see that. Duties were often levied according to the weight or measurement of the goods. As each region has its own system of weights and measures, this involved time-consuming calculation, children. The measure of cloth, for example, was the illy, which in each region stood for a different length. So an illy of textile material bought in Frankfurt would get to 54.7 centimeter of cloth. In Mainz, 55.1 centimeter. Nuremberg, 65.6 centimeter. Freiburg, 53.5 centimeter. You can see that each region stood for a different length. Okay. Then such conditions were viewed as obstacles, as hurdles to economic exchange and growth by the new commercial classes, who argued for the creation of a unified economic territory along the unhindered movements of goods, people and capital. So these conditions were the different uniform weights and measures, then different currencies. It was just a hurdle for the movements of goods and capital from one place to another. So the commercial classes, they were arguing that there should be uniformity, because this type of hurdles are created and this type of hurdles are bringing you can say that it is creating obstacles for economic exchange and growth. Trade could not be flourished because of this hurdles, because of this obstacles to it. So in 1834, a custom union or Zollverein was formed at the initiative of Prussia. So who formed Zollverein, children? Prussia. Do remember that. Prussia. In which year? In 1834. So in 1834, a custom union or Zollverein was formed at the initiative of Prussia and joined by most of the German states. So custom union or Zollverein was formed in 1834 and it was formed by Prussia, and then later on it was joined by most of the German states. So the union abolished, the custom union abolished tariff barriers and reduced the number of currencies from how much, from 30 to 2. पहले 30 करेंसीज हुआ करती थी, उसको कम करके कस्टम यूनियन या ज़ोलावरेन ने उसको 2 कर दिया. And the custom union also abolished tariff barriers. Okay, so in 1834 a custom union, which is or Zollverein, it was formed at the initiative of Prussia and it was joined by most of the German states, and this custom union abolished tariff barriers and reduced the number of currencies from over 30 to 2. The creation of network of railway further stimulated mobility, harnessing economic interest to national unification. So a wave of economic nationalism strengthened the wider nationalist sentiments growing at that time. So till here it will come in the test, children. So read the chapter thoroughly. MCQ type of questions will be coming, and for that you have to read the chapter very nicely. And then you have to read the sources which are given in the book, children, till page 10. The chapter will be coming. So for that you have to read it very nicely, very carefully, children, and all the best for your test. I know that you are going to do it very nicely. Thank you and have